Anybody out there have a knee? Jair was looking for one for Christmas and he didn't get it. What's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Lombardi Time Brews. I'm your host, John Delray. Today we are previewing Packers versus Vikings, and in case you can't tell, I, for Christmas, received my son's cold. So here we are, trudging through. I am very sorry for the inevitable voice cracks and mini coughs and whatever else is going to come out during this. But let's talk Packers versus Vikings, a true battle of seedings for the NFC playoff spot. Now, the Vikings, they still are technically alive for the division. Like, they got a lot to play for, potentially even some home playoff games. Green Bay, they're just trying to stay being above the 7 seed because they don't want to travel to Philly or Detroit or potentially Minnesota. So, they lots to play for here, and that's part of the reason why it's the game of the week. Keep in mind, in case you didn't hear, it is a 3:25 game on Sunday. It got switched to the afternoon slot. So let's dive into the injury report. What's going on? Packers didn't exactly get incredible news on that front today, and the Vikings actually got some decent news here. So let's go with the Packers first. Out is Quay Walker, Evan Williams, Andre Dillard, and Jair Alexander. Look, I don't know what's going on with Jair, right? We do know that he told Matt Schneiderman a while back that it's a torn PCL. Yeah, absolutely. It takes a long time to heal from. Totally understandable. But this week, and he's practiced at full or limited for at least a couple weeks now, right? That's been part of the baffling thing of like, if he's practicing, he can go. Now, I've maintained all along, as LaFleur has said, like they're looking at his speed thresholds. He's not hitting it, so he's not playing. All right, that makes perfect sense to me. I'm good with it. But then you got this week, and he goes from being estimated to being a full participant, then to limited, to then a DNP today, then being declared out. That's the wrong way, last I checked, towards playing. So obviously, I don't want to say or speculate that maybe he had a setback, but it certainly does seem as though it's trending the wrong way. Now, for the Packers, maybe they're just outright hoping that he's just ready for the playoffs, in which case that's 100% understandable. At this point, I'm just rooting that he's going to be back for the playoffs. No, I don't buy into any of the speculation that something is going on behind the scenes. Even Matt LaFleur on Matt Schneiderman's podcast with LaFleur said that there is nothing going on behind the scenes, that this isn't some organizational problem with him, anything like that. So I'm just going to give the benefit of the doubt, say it's just not where they want it to be, and they're saving up for the playoffs. As for why he hasn't gone on IR, look, they had an open roster spot forever. Like, the team was just sitting there at 89 guys instead of 90 for a while. So they haven't needed, or I should say 52 instead of 53 for regular season. So they haven't needed to put him on IR. And this way they've allowed him to keep on practicing, to continually test to see if he would be ready to go. So I don't blame him one bit for not putting him on IR either. Then in the questionable category, a few guys here. Javon Bullard, and supposedly he's looked pretty good since returning. Going to see if maybe he can go. Teron Hopper with an ankle injury, the linebacker, and then Christian Watson with his bruise. Now, as I talked about the other day, like bruises, don't think that this is just like a little like thing you got on your bicep from bumping into a cabinet, right? Bruises can be pretty impactful when they're bone bruises, and especially if they include swelling and a lack of mobility and everything like that. But still sounds like he has a chance in this game. The question that I have more here is with Javon Bullard. If he's able to go, where does he go? Because if with Evan Williams being out, do you put Bullard in at safety and then put Zane Anderson back on the bench? Or do you put him back in the slot and then have Nixon go boundary with Ja out? That might be pretty tempting. And it's one of the things to watch for against this potent Minnesota passing attack. Where is he going to wind up? Could really be one of the themes of the game. As for the Vikings, they happen to be getting healthier. Ivan Pace Jr., he's returning from IR. His status is questionable. If you dive into the Minnesota side of things, they sound pretty optimistic that he's going to be able to make his return. Even Harrison Smith, who faced some early week speculation, he's been taken off the injury report. The only other one that's on like a designation list at all is Fabian Moreau, the depth corner. He's out as expected. Just keep in mind with the Vikings, though, a couple other notables on IR would be Mekhi Blackman, the cornerback, as well as left tackle Christian Darrisaw. Since last playing the Packers, though, in week 4, yes, Darrisaw is hurt. He's been replaced by Cam Robinson. They traded for him at the trade deadline, and we're going to cover it in a little bit, but Robinson, he's been competent. He has not been as good as Darrisaw. So, who are the Minnesota Vikings? Well, They're a pretty good football team. They're sitting at 13-2. They've rattled off wins against the Giants, 49ers, Texans, Packers, Jets, Colts, Jags, Titans, Bears, Cardinals, Falcons, and Bears again. That was a terrible mistake. I'm sorry. And a 3-point win over the Seahawks last week. Then they've also got their losses against the Lions in week 7 and the Rams in week 8. Now, the Lions' loss came at home, while the Rams' loss was on the road. So they've got only one loss at each. Plus, they're the winners of 8 straight games. It should be noted here, for a little bit more full context, though, in their full schedule, that they are freakishly good in one-score games. 7-1 in games with a differential that's 7 points or less thus far. Because of that, Green Bay on the season, in spite of being 2 losses behind, actually has a 6-point better differential on the season than Minnesota. By the way, just in case you were curious, who are the top 3 teams in terms of point differential in the National Football Conference? Detroit, Green Bay, Minnesota. That's it. Yeah. And they're 3 of the top 5 teams in the NFL as well. When we say that the NFC North is good this year, it ain't no joke. That is for certain. So let's take a look at who these Vikings are. We're going to do it a little bit quicker. This is our second time through for the year. But ultimately, we've got Sam Darnold starting at quarterback. Aaron Jones, yes, that one, former Packer running back, obviously. Then Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison, the vast majority of their receiving there. TJ Hawkinson has come back since the Packers last played them. And he's had more limited production this year than last, but nonetheless, could be due in part to Addison getting more production and just the change of quarterback with Sam Darnold now being there. CJ Ham is expected to be good to go for this game at fullback, and then the line. Now, as I mentioned, Darius on IR, Cam Robinson at left tackle now. But they still are starting Blake Brandel, Dalton Risner, Garrett Bradbury, Brian O'Neill, pretty good at right tackle. But the true weakness of this Minnesota interior, or the line, I should say, is the interior. True weakness of the interior, those 2 guys right there, Brandel and Bradbury, we're going to be talking about in just a second. Then taking a look at their defense, you got Tillery, Phillips, Bullard, Greenard, Kruger Hill, Cashman, Van Ginkel. Van Ginkel's having a terrific year. Then you got first-round draft pick Dallas Turner, who's still kind of a rotational pass rusher, but he's been turning it on as of late. You got Jamin Davis, the former Packer practice squatter, who was signed to Minnesota. Then in the secondary, you got Stephon Gilmore, who's turned out to be a fantastic fit for Brian Flores. Smith and Bynum back there at safety, and then Byron Murphy Jr. as their nickelback with Shaquille Griffin at corner. So overall, a very, very good Minnesota roster, no doubt about it. So let's dive into where they rank. And again, talking over the last 3 games predominantly, just to show where the biggest trends are. In terms of rushing yards per game over their last 3, what they've given up, so this is the defensive side of the ball, they're giving up 110 yards per game rushing. That's 14th in the NFL. In terms of attempts, does it match up? Yeah, they get run on the 17th most in the NFL, so pretty good correlation there. In terms of passing, they're giving up the 4th most passing yards in the league over the last 3 weeks at 270.3 yards per game. And attempts, 5th most, so yeah, it's perfectly corollary there. And that could be due in large part due to Minnesota being in the lead quite a bit, with the exception of really the last game against Seattle. Taking over a look at some full season defensive stats for Minnesota, they're giving up 18.4 points per game. That's 3rd best in the NFL. And then in red zone, 54% of the red zone trips against them turn into touchdowns. It's 13th best in the NFL, kind of middle of the pack. But while they do give up touchdowns at a pretty decent clip in the red zone, they don't allow teams to get into the red zone that much, and that's what's kept their points per game down. They allow the 3rd fewest red zone trips per game. Something to keep in mind, and something also that's going to have to give, which I'll get to in just a little bit. Offensively, over their last 3, they're getting 103.3 yards per game on the ground, and that's 17th best in the NFL, and they run 16th most in the NFL, so perfectly in line there. And then in terms of passing, 250 yards per game over the last 3, that's 6th best in the NFL. However, their attempts are at 12 most, one of the bigger gaps between attempts and production in amongst the Minnesota stats. However, over their last 3 games, they are starting to pass more. In fact, a full 4 attempts more per game over their last 3 games. Looking over the full season now for Minnesota, their points per game, 26.4 points per game. That's 9th best in the NFL. Red zone, they're 9th best again at 60% in the red zone. However, over their last 3, 8%. That's tops in the NFL by a full 9% over the Buffalo Bills, who are in second place. 90% of their red zone trips in their last 3 games have become touchdowns, something Jeff Heffley needs to be very, very aware of. And then in terms of turnovers, they're sitting at a positive 0.7 per game. That's 4th best in the NFL. Green Bay just barely above them, sitting at 3rd best in the NFL. Then in terms of sacks gotten, they get 2.9 sacks per game. However, over the last 3, they've been not nearly as productive, only 1.7. Then in terms of sacks given up, they're giving up 3.1 sacks per game. That's 24th in the NFL. Penalties, they get called for 6.5 penalties per game. That's 18th. And then yards, 51.2, middle of the pack. So I'm not going to go on forever about this matchup and everything. We already faced this team once. But as things have evolved, there's kind of one key theme here. And that is that this game is going to be a battle of pressure. See, on the Vikings side of things, per Zach Cruz, Sam Darnold is 23rd in pressure to sack ratio and 23rd in turnover-worthy play rate. Paired along that, the Vikings are also 26th in pass blocking efficiency. And I mentioned earlier that Cam Robinson, he's been competent. He also has been a significant downgrade in the pass blocking department from Christian Darrisaw. The two of them are at nearly the same amount of snaps now, and each has given up 2 sacks. But Robinson has given up 20 hurries in 8 games, versus Darrisaw, who gave up only 7 in 7 games. So while he may not give up that many more sacks, it is certainly possible to get around Cam Robinson. Overall, though, as for where to force or where to concentrate the attack, it certainly is up the middle. Garrett Bradbury's having a pretty awful season at center, which is music to Kenny Clark's ears, but then also Blake Bendel. Combined, those two gentlemen in the interior of Minnesota's line have given up 10 sacks and 33 pressures. On the Packers side of things, in week 4, remember it was Jordan Love's first game back in action, and he still put up some cumulatively overall some pretty good stats, but he did throw 3 interceptions as the Packers came storming back in half number 2, if you recall that. But one thing that is true is he was pretty abysmal under pressure in week 4. Pretty darn good when he wasn't going against pressure. In that game, when under pressure, he had a 36% completion rate and threw 2 picks. However, though, in the time since, really specifically in the last few weeks, Love has truly turned the tide for Green Bay against the pressure and against blitz. Per Felipe Reciciti, one of my favorite writers out there, in weeks 11 through 16, Love, when blitzed, he's got 523 yards, a 71% completion rate, 5 touchdowns with 0 interceptions, not even a single turnover-worthy play rate, and a QB rating of 126.5. Which is really returning him to where we saw Love in the back half of last year when he became known as this blitz killer, this man coverage killer. And all of that, the fact that he now is executing at such a high level against the blitz, bodes really, really well against a team like Minnesota that loves to blitz as much as Brian Flores has them do. So ultimately, when you look at both sides of the field, sure, there's quirks in the run game. Green Bay's run game certainly has been stronger as of late compared to that of the Vikings. That will be a key in this game. You know Green Bay is not going to want to just keep on handing the ball over to Minnesota. So I would expect Josh Jacobs to be carried a lot. But what it really comes down to is truly pressure. One team still seems to be doing well against pressure, or has gotten well against pressure. Minnesota still seemingly is struggling in that regard. And one team certainly has a better offensive line versus another one that collectively seems to be beatable. And it really could make the difference for each offense in this game. Plus, one extra little thing here for Green Bay. Over the last 3 games, the Packers get into the red zone, an opportunity more than Minnesota every single time. Green Bay in the last 3 games has gotten into the red zone 4.3 trips per game. Minnesota sitting at 3.3. So, if you're going against Minnesota, a very, very good team, you best capitalize on that one extra opportunity. And you better actually get that extra opportunity because we covered how good Minnesota is at keeping them out. So Green Bay needs to keep that going. And then Green Bay actually needs to capitalize it because with Minnesota sitting at 90% over the last 3 in the red zone, we know that they're going to get theirs. Green Bay, if they get more chances, has to take advantage. Look, this is overall great matchup. Even per the dope sheet, as Maggie Loney pointed out, that this is the first time that these two teams have squared off in their 64-year history, where each one of them have 11 or more wins. So for as good as Minnesota is, though, it just feels like the mainstream is tilting towards Green Bay here. I know that even the money lines have tilted that way, whatever, if you follow that kind of deal. So I ultimately have to side with Green Bay as well. It does just feel that way. Green Bay is really rounding into form. This is Matt LaFleur in December. I'm hard-pressed to believe that Minnesota is going to complete a season sweep of Green Bay. And what Green Bay is truly lacking in their resume is that one signature win. Because if you go dive into the national conversations about Green Bay, what do you know? Well, they haven't beat anybody. They got a losing record against teams that are going to go to the playoffs. Minnesota, Detroit, Philadelphia, etc. They've lost all of them. Well, this is their chance to get that signature win. Green Bay 34, Minnesota 24. See you at the watch party. Claudia and I will be here for the entire game, hanging out, chatting all throughout Packers versus Vikings. Thanks so much, everybody, for joining me. Do hope you had a fantastic holiday this week. Hope you have a great weekend. And as always, go Pack, go.